So thank you for watching my 5-minute presentation of the paper, The New Benchmark for Forecasts of the Real Price of Crude Oil. In this presentation, I'm going to be showing you forecasts of the real price of crude oil that are better than anything that's been seen in the literature thus far, but also arguing that the real price of crude oil is not forecastable in the short run. So crude oil is very important for the macroeconomy and has garnered a lot of attention among forecasters. The literature considers the real price of crude oil forecastable and has arrived at this by estimating models with average prices and comparing against the average price no change benchmark. However, this approach is not suitable for temporally aggregated data. First, if real prices of crude oil follow a random walk at the daily frequency, then the average prices are predictable by construction. And second, it's been known that there's going to be a significant loss of information from aggregation when forecasting. So in this paper, we use disaggregated and daily real prices of crude oil for both model-based forecasts and for forecast evaluation by comparing against the end of period no change benchmark. And while simple, these will have profound implications for the literature. We follow the standard setting, looking at real-time forecasts of the monthly real price of crude oil. And we're going to look at 3 exercises. The first is going to compare the end of period no change benchmark to the average price no change benchmark. And even in the case where the end of period price is not observed, such as for the refiner's acquisition cost, we're going to propose a simple imputation method. Second, we're going to examine disaggregated econometric approaches, which include estimating models at the daily frequency and then aggregating the forecasts to the monthly frequency as proposed by lookup pool. And the second is period end price sampling, which will estimate our models at the monthly frequency using end of period prices. And we're going to be conducting a replication and extension of the Baumeister and Kilian, where we independently update real-time data to 2012, which is available on my website and will be updated monthly. And we want to test whether the daily real price of crude oil is closely approximated by a random walk, because if so, then the average real price of crude oil is predictable by construction and has been compared against too lenient of a benchmark. So for our various crude oil price series, we can compare the end of period versus period average no change forecast in both the MSP ratio and for directional accuracy. And we find over 40% improvements in both that are robust across the entire evaluation sample at the 5% level. So we can immediately see that the end of period no change benchmark is a much more stringent benchmark, a higher benchmark to meet, which may be surprising because the real price of crude oil isn't exactly considered to be easy to forecast. So how can our models raise to this more stringent benchmark? Well, we consider disaggregated approaches. So we have the MSP ratio and the success ratio of 3 univariate models. And in this standard setting, we estimate our models with monthly average prices. And we can see here that for the different forecast horizons, none of our models are able to outperform the average price no change benchmark at the 5% level. However, just estimating the models on the daily data and then aggregating up can result in up to 40% improvement in forecast accuracy, which do significantly improve upon the average price no change benchmark, but as noticed by the absence of bold values is not significant relative to the end of period no change benchmark. The best disaggregated approach is the period end price sampling, which results in over 40% improvement in our forecasts and does show significant relative to the end of period no change benchmark at long horizons. So immediately we can see the importance of comparing against the appropriate no change benchmark before declaring the usefulness of a particular forecasting approach. So that was for univariate models. Let's consider multivariate models. So we are replicating the Baumeister and Kilian Bayesian vector autoregression, the autoregressive and Bayesian autoregressive model. And we can see here that in the updated sample, none of these models are able to outperform the average price no change benchmark. And this has been shown in several papers finding the deterioration in forecast accuracy after the late 2010s, the late 2000s. But you can see here that just by replacing the average prices with the end of period prices, we can achieve very large improvements in forecast accuracy, which are actually robust over the entire evaluation sample. So the new benchmark of this paper is not some econometric model, but is showing the importance of comparing against the appropriate no change benchmark. In the paper, we go further and we find that when using disaggregated approaches, it lowers the desired autoregressive legs because we're not introducing spurious autocorrelation when aggregating. It also changes the desirability of covariates, particularly for measures of global economic activity, and it reduces the usefulness of combination approaches at the short horizons. And we aren't able to find any model that can outperform the end of period no change benchmark at the one step ahead. This calls for a major evaluation in the literature. This overturns the apparent usefulness of model-based forecasts in the short run. It suggests that large forecast gains can be achieved just by using disaggregated data for a number of forecasting approaches, and but whatever model is being used, these forecasts should be compared against the end of period no change benchmark. This has large policy implications coming from the fact that we can achieve larger forecast accuracy and have already influenced the way that the Bank of Canada is conducting their forecasts. Thank you.